And I think that's critical, absolutely critical in terms of looking at academic strengths, weaknesses, looking at behavioral issues at
Mm-hmm.
school. But to only use that as the one measure, I don't think it's enough. That's really going to help them and support them and build their self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about girls, that's one of the biggest differences, that their self-esteem can get really impacted.
Yeah.
And there's more things that need to be in that assessment that's really going to put a comprehensive treatment program for that client.
Excellent. Well, John, getting back to the topic of misdiagnosis or undiagnosis of ADHD for females, for women and girls, what are some of the common symptoms of, let's say, classic ADHD?
So there's what we call the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. So what we look at is there's inattention, and we also look at hyperactivity.
Okay.
And if there's another, what we call combined presentation. And so inattention, we have one of our sheets. This is, for example, in our assessment. We'll do a subjective and we'll ask our clients or the parents or the adult to fill this out. So under the inattention component, fails to give close attention to details, makes careless mistakes, has difficulty sustaining attention, loses things needed for tasks or activities, often procrastinates, avoids or reluctant to engage in tasks when it requires sustained mental effort. So that's more the inattentive. And then for hyperactivity, fidgets, with their hands, squirms, is often on the go, like just driven by a motor, has difficult remaining quiet at work or at leisure activities. So these are the impulsivity, has difficulty, waiting their turn, often interrupts or, intrudes on others. So these are some of the, what I would call the subjective things, behavioral observations. And again, I want to reiterate with our clients is these are critical, absolutely critical. But we had a client come in on Monday who had been given a diagnosis, adult, early 30s, had been given a diagnosis by a medical doctor based on a clinical interview. But in that clinical interview, Trevor, they never asked, had he ever had a concussion? And he was a high-level soccer player
Okay.
throughout all his adolescence and even early 20s.
So there's a high chance that he did.
So a lot of the symptoms that we just discussed, right? But what could be causing it could be ADHD. But what was coming up on the brain scan, and the reason why we really heavily rely on a brain scan is because, and you've heard me say this previous interviews, is that it shows us why. So like we do continuous performance tests, whether it be the Conners, the TOVA, the IVA. You need, in my opinion, an objective assessment of auditory and visual focus. And even if you do have those, and they do show that a person is having difficulty with impulse control, sustained attention, directing their focus, it still doesn't answer the question of as to why that person. So for example, when we're doing comprehensive assessments, we need to see, at any point in time, did they have a concussion? And sure enough, that's what was happening with this gentleman. And it was the brain scan that allowed us to see why this person was having difficulty with these symptoms. So again, that's where I cautious, like I think it's a critical piece, going through this DSM checklist, but we also have to understand why that might be happening for that individual. For a lot of females, they can have anxiety or depression. And if I'm more inwardly focused, guess what I may not be paying attention to? The external. And so sometimes people have difficulty with focusing because of anxiety or depression. There's a little bit of a chicken and egg, because if some people can't focus, that's where they might feel down or they might feel anxious about that. And ADHD, there's a lot of, the fancy term is comorbid. There is a high incidence of anxiety and depression if someone does have ADHD. Right. But sometimes just in and itself, somebody could have exam anxiety. And that might be, causing difficulty with them focusing. But that's not ADHD. And that's one of the nice things about the brain scan is it allows us to truly see what's going on inside the brain so that we can make a more accurate, in my opinion, assessment and then treatment protocol for that client.
Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. The next question that I've got for you, John, is how does ADHD present differently in females than males? So I know they are different. Can you explain a little bit about that to us?
And I want to apologize to my audience group here. I've written a bunch of notes. So
that's fine. Yeah.
So with regards to girls, more of them only have the inattentive types of ADHD. So I want to really emphasize this, that often they might go undiagnosed because they might be in the back of the classroom. They're not disturbing anybody.
Yeah.
But they might be in what we call a theta brainwave state where they're daydreaming. And they're, again, more inwardly focused. And because they're not disturbing anybody, it gets unnoticed. So they have more what we call that inattentive. And often they get written off as, daydreamy or dizzy.
Right.
If they have hyperactive, and it's interesting because more often, generally speaking, females have more what we call the inattentive presentation. But I would almost say, and it's been interesting in the last couple of weeks, we've had more female clients coming in with combined presentation where they're showing the hyperactivity. And again, just some of the research, if they have hyperactive impulsive symptoms, they're more likely to be seen as pushy, hyper-talkative, or over-emotional. Impulsive girls may have trouble being socially appropriate and struggle to make and keep friends. They often work so hard to compensate for their weaknesses that they're able to hide their challenges. The growing awareness as they get older that they have to work much harder than their peers without ADHD is very damaging to their self-esteem.
Right.
Girls who are chronically hard on themselves about their mistakes may be struggling with thoughts that they're stupid or broken. And I can't emphasize this enough, Trevor. Like, one thing that helped me a lot is, I'd heard this a long time ago, is think of your brain like a car engine. So literally across the street at our office, there's a Ferrari that appears. And think of your brain like a Ferrari. So you got this really high performance engine. But if one part of the engine isn't firing properly, does it matter how much we put our foot on the gas?
No.
No. And until we get that part of the engine firing, that's when it's going to really make a difference. So one thing I want to emphasize is ADHD is a neurological. And so it's I always joke with my clients, I've had 10 knee surgeries. It's not that I don't want to run down to the end of the block if you ask me to do that, but my body's not allowing me to do it.
Right.
And it's the same thing with ADHD. A lot of, with regards to, no, you're not stupid, you're not broken, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just your brain at the time right now is just not allowing you to do what you need to do.
Right.
And a lot of girls, they take it, take it to heart that there's something wrong, and it's not. I want to reemphasize that it's just that part of the brain's not firing correctly. And when we do get that corrected, often, self-esteem, self-confidence dramatically improves. With women, again, just made some notes, it often gets noticed or undiagnosed because, often they're quiet, they're daydreaming, they're not disturbing anyone. When they might, when they're having trouble concentrating, they might be, described as or labeled as being, depressed or lazy.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, we had a client here just in this past week. They only find out that they have ADHD when one of their children has been diagnosed, and then all of a sudden they kind of start to notice similar patterns in themselves. We had a client this week that, she's a mom. She has 3 children. She's a single mom. And because she's having difficulty with focus and managing her emotions, she's having difficulty, managing an ADHD child. And so it often become overwhelming, and that's where she, has that emotional distress. And, one of the things we're really working with her is the old, metaphor of you got to put the mask on yourself first, because if you don't, if you're in the airplane and it's going down, if you're going to be of any resource to anybody else, you've got to put it on yourself first. And a lot of moms, that's a difficult challenge.
Yeah.